Putin power. A new independent poll shows the Russian president's approval rating is at an all-time high. With Russia isolated on the international stage and suffering from economic sanctions, why is Putin so popular at home? This is Inside Story. Hello there, a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Vladimir Putin first stepped into power 15 years ago. His leadership has been bolstered by portraying himself as a patriotic and unshakable president with unmatchable athletic ability. In the past year, Putin's relationship with the West has deteriorated. Russians are struggling under Western sanctions after Putin's annexation of Crimea and support for Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. The ruble has tumbled and the price of oil, Russia's main export, has slumped. But despite all this, President Putin's popularity at home has skyrocketed. The Levada Center, an independent Russian polling and research agency, found Putin's July approval rating to be 87%, just down from a record high of 89% in June. It's a big jump from 2012, when 64% approved of him. Another Levada Center survey found 87% of Russians support Putin's annexation of Crimea. 66% think Western sanctions are aimed to humiliate and weaken Russia. And 70% of Russians believe the country should stick to its current position on Ukraine. So why are Russians rallying around their leader? Well, this is the question we're going to be putting to our guests today. They're all in Moscow. We have Dmitry Babich, political analyst and contributor to Voice of Russia; Andrei Piontkovsky, Russia political analyst and author of Another Look into Putin's Soul; and Denis Volkov, sociologist at the Levada Center, that independent group that conducted these surveys. Great to have you all with us. Welcome very much to Inside Story. Andrei Piontkovsky, if I could start with you, what do you make of this poll? Is Putin really this popular?
Well, Putin is popular, especially annexation of Crimea was popular. In any country, annexation of neighbor territory would be greeted by public opinion, at least immediately. But generally, but I don't think, I don't believe that 87 or 91% is supporting Putin. With all my respect to our colleague sociologists and especially to Levada Center, I would say that in authoritarian society, this opinion poll means not much. Not because sociologists are rigging the results, but just imagine this technology of this telephone call surveys. You are sitting in your apartment and somebody you don't know call you and asking, are you for Mr. Putin or against Mr. Putin? Or the so-called unique genetic code of Russian people, or experience of the latest 100 years of our history tell that it's much safer to say, yes, I support, just in case.
Okay.
Well, Comrade
Denis Volkov, that question really has to be directed to you, because it's your organisation that conducted this poll. Are you happy with the methodology of this survey? Is it a true reflection of Russia's beliefs?
Yeah, we are using this methodology for 25 years, and it's not a telephone calls. It's face-to-face surveys, and well, with this methodology, we saw the different trends even in Putin's popularity, starting from 30% in 1999, and then sometimes 88, as it is now, actually 3 times before 2014, but also around 60% several times. And what is, I think, very important, that from 2008 to just the beginning of 2014, we saw gradual decline in popularity. More and more people were, I would say, tired of Putin. But Crimea, annexation of Crimea, changed everything.
Okay, Levada certainly is a
it's
a widely respected organisation. For the sake of argument today, so we can move our discussion forward, let's accept the results. Dmitry Babish, why do you think Russians love Putin so much at the moment?
Well, I think that the fact that they support him against other possible candidates doesn't mean that all of his reforms are popular. I think that, for example, the education reform in Russia is very unpopular. The health reform is very unpopular, but these very reforms happen to be inspired by the Western example, and some of them are actually copying the West. For example, the idea to introduce standardized testing at schools, to check the school children's results in the end of their studies. This is a purely Western idea implanted in Russia at the time of Putin, and it is very unpopular. But a lot of people support him primarily because they see that the West is trying to topple him quite openly, and the people have a sense of contradiction. If the governments in the West, if the United States and the European Union, who are obviously not quite friendly to Russia, and people have seen it during the events in Ukraine, in neighboring Ukraine, if they want to get him so much, then probably we should support him even if we don't like a lot of his policies inside the country. That, I think, is the logic behind these results.
OK, well, we'll certainly want to revisit some of those points throughout this discussion, especially that idea that the West is after Putin, trying to topple him. But just before we get into that, I do want to be able to show our viewers some of the strongman images that Putin has created for himself, because this is, of course, how a lot of the world sees the Russian president. Denis Volkov, these pictures of him performing macho stunts. I mean, we see him bare-chested fishing, patting a tiger. We also know that he's shot one. These 8 goals that he's scored at an all-star hockey match. I mean, they're too good to be true, aren't they? What do Russians make of them?
Well, I would say we measured this as well. These pictures, I would say, are for the West, and people inside the country, well, rather skeptical about the picture. But what they're very emotional about is that Putin, as they understand it, gave them the feeling that Russia is a great power again, for the first time from the collapse of the Soviet Union. What people in the focus groups are saying, well, before Crimea, Putin was only speaking about Russia's greatness. Now he proved it all right. And I would say it's also important, I think, speaking about Crimea and Ukraine, that everything what is happening there is, well, from inside the country, it looks very different because of, there are 4 main TV channels that are influenced by the government, by the authorities, and they provide very different picture about peaceful settlement in Crimea, that no shots, and like people say, well, 2 days and Crimea is ours, and it's kind of a very joyful for the majority, and then they don't go into what is going on in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine. Though they watch it on TV, they are not very much attached to the people suffering. Well, it's not about. It's not the point. The point is that Russia is great again.
Okay, and we will certainly be getting more into Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea in just a moment. First, Andrei Pionkovsky, I want to just stick with this idea of Putin as a strongman and just how important that is for Russians to have a strong leader, someone who can shoot a tiger, someone who can score 8 goals in an all-star ice hockey match.
Well, his macho image it plays into more general picture of leader who is strong on international scene. And while we're discussing the images perceived by Russian population. Let's not forget enormous role of propaganda on TV. Putin has 100% monopoly on TV. There is no other, well, 80% of population got their information from 4 state channels. And state propaganda creates the image of encircled fortress. Russia surrounded by enemies who want to destroy it, to dismantle, to introduce their decadent ways of life. And Putin plays on this national card the necessity to defend and to protect Russia motherland. But in reality, nobody threatens Russia. Putin creates tension in Europe by his program of Russian world. In his Crimean speech, he defined Russia as a divided nation. And he interpreted Crimea annexation as a restoration of historical land. It's a very dangerous nationalist program.
Dmitry Babish, to what extent do you agree with that Russians are fed this program of propaganda through media which is totally controlled by the Kremlin?
Well, I agree with Denis that the images that you have just showed, they were primarily for the West. Usually you see these images in Russia in places where you have foreigners buying T-shirts with Putin in sunglasses. It's just, I think this is primarily the image of Putin vented by the Western media. You know, he is a strong man, he is a dictator, and the picture inside Russia, I think, is very different. First, okay, I mean, Russians hear a lot from various political analysts, liberal political analysts, that nothing is threatening Russia. But let's remember Mr. Obama's speech at the UN, where he said that Russia was the second threat to humanity after Ebola. You know, that was just several months ago. So people get this information not only from the so-called state-owned channels, but they can get it from, for example, RBC channel, Ross Business Consulting, which is a liberal television channel in Russia. But it's an objective channel. It says exactly what Mr. Obama has said. And of course, when people hear about Russian economy in tatters, you know, Mr. Obama saying it with joy, they understand that the West is not 100% a friend, as we thought it during the times of Mr. Yeltsin. So I think that most of the propaganda against the West in Russia is done by the West itself. For example, when the Ukrainian president Poroshenko appointed Mikhail Saakashvili, you know, the former president of Georgia, who was at war with Russia in 2008, when he was appointed the governor of Odessa, mostly Russian-speaking city in the south of Ukraine, of course, a lot of people in Russia interpreted it as an action aimed against Russia. Okay. Not so much to make Odessa a better place, but to annoy Russia. And Russia was indeed annoyed. So there's no surprise that people react in this way.
OK, well, let's at this stage just bring in a bit of background, because Putin, a former KGB officer, was a virtual unknown when Russia's first president, Boris Yeltsin, picked him to be prime minister. He was elevated to the Kremlin after Yeltsin's surprise resignation on New Year's Eve in 1999. In March 2000, Vladimir Putin won the presidential election with 53% of the vote. So how has Russia changed under Putin? Well, since 2000, its economic output per person has almost doubled, but more than half of Russians are reported to be living off the state budget. When Putin came to power, about 29% of the population was living below the poverty line. That rate is now around 11%. Russia's murder rate has dropped, but it does remain higher than anywhere else in Europe. And there are allegations that Putin's leadership has been linked to corruption, especially surrounding the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. Denis Volkov, much of Putin's rise has been based on his economic achievements. But to what extent does the economy today explain his popularity?
Well, I think it's one of the main reasons why people support Putin. And we can speak about the figures in the output, for example, but still by now the regime rests on social stability, because and right now before the oil prices were going down, it was very easy to sustain this level of social spendings. Now it is a question how the government will go on with it. But what we see that first we saw the collapse of the ruble in December, and we registered the shock. The majority of people were shocked by this, and all the moods went down considerably, like in crisis of 2009. But what we saw in April and May, that all the moods recovered to the pre-crisis level, because the governments took some steps to stabilize the situation. The prices were reduced, and people are happy again, rather optimistic.
Andrei Pionkovsky, but the situation now, the economy now, it's not good, is it? Because we've got low oil prices, we're seeing sanctions over the situation in Ukraine. Indeed, we have about 31% saying it's in a bad way.
The problem with our economy is not Western sanctions or oil prices. They certainly aggravate the situation. The problem is that it's kleptocracy. And frankly, this kleptocracy was not created by Putin. It was created by Yeltsin and his oligarchs. And Putin was appointed by Yeltsin and those oligarchs just to protect this system. He was very lucky during years of exorbitant oil prices, but now our economy faces a fundamental crisis. First of all, it's not market economy. There is no such fundamental institute of market economy as private property in our country.
Okay, but just to keep it to today, because aren't these sanctions hurting the situation now?
As for ordinary people, they are affected more not by sanctions, but they are affected by Putin's so-called counter-sanctions. Putin banned food imports from Europe, and it led to a rise in prices for food. As for sanctions, Western sanctions that are not working so swiftly, so evidently. The main aspect of this sanction is denying cheap credits for Russian economy, and it certainly troubles businessmen and politicians. And Moscow is trying to repair relations with the West.
Dmitry Babich, I just want to move on. I've got to keep moving on. Sorry, we don't have that much time left. Look, moving on to Crimea. The annexation of Crimea last year was hugely popular. 87% of people support it. Why is that?
Well, because it indeed happened almost without bloodshed. I think 2 or 3 people were killed, and mostly incidentally. And second, the subsequent actions of the new Ukrainian government spoke in favor of taking Crimea back then, because we can easily imagine what would happen if Mr. Saakashvili was appointed the governor of Crimea. That could happen if Crimea stayed in Ukraine. As for sanctions, I think they were very beneficial to Russia and Russian economy, because the Russian agricultural producers managed to sell more food now instead of the imported foodstuffs. And, if the sanctions affected anyone, they affected the oligarchs. The West stopped supplying us equipment for oil extraction, and this is a business controlled by the oligarchs. And the West stopped giving credits to the Russian banks, Banks are also controlled by the oligarchs.
Certainly a
the
silver
West never
lining to
gave credit
sanctions
to the Russian
expressed
industry,
there.
to the Russian economy. So I think the sanctions were good for Russia, and that's why Putin is popular.
Okay, absolutely. That's, I'm not sure a lot of people would agree that sanctions are in any way good, but Dmitry, thanks very much for your opinion there. Denis Volkov, I just need to move on to our last section, the future. What does Putin have to do to remain so popular?
Well, it's a very good question. I don't know the answer because, if we think and if we are right that it's the popularity is based on economic stability, it's under a very big question right now. And of course, the effect of Crimea, effect of this small and victorious war is already over. And so the regime is facing big troubles. Though I would say the popularity and legitimacy of the regime right now is enough to go smoothly through the next elections, parliamentary and presidential elections, if nothing, disastrous happen. So I would say that the regime moves through these elections and then they try to figure it out what to do next.
Andrei Pionkovsky,
my guess is what will happen.
Any legitimate opposition on the horizon?
Well, if Putin really is so popular, why authorities are rigging all kinds of election, including even municipal in Moscow region, and doing everything to block access of opposition party to the participation in election. This kind of regime never lose political scene in result of election organized by themselves.
Dmitry Babbage, the last word to you. Would you be happy, will Russians be happy to see Putin running for president again, and will he win?
I think he will run, and most likely he will win. And he will keep winning until the relations between Russia and the West change. Until people see that the West is doing everything to topple him, until, for example, as it happened before the last election, Mr. Biden comes to Moscow and says, we wouldn't like to see Mr. Putin in Kremlin again, people will be voting for Putin, sometimes just to annoy the West. You know, this is a very powerful impetus for voting for Putin.
Okay, I have actually been awarded another 30 seconds or so. Denis Volkov, in 2024, of course, when his 2 consecutive term limit expires, what are we likely to see happen then?
Well, it's a very big time ahead, but I would say, it's not quite correct to compare the ratings of the regime with no political alternative, which is Russia, and the Western regimes where there is a political alternative and competition. It's a very different situation. So 87% here is not comparable enough with the same figures in the West, if you can find such figures.
Okay, very interesting.
We must keep it in mind.
Absolutely, very interesting indeed, and I'm certain this is going to be a topic that we will be revisiting in the coming years. Thanks very much to our guests for a good discussion today, Dmitry Babbage, Andrei Pionkovsky and Denis Volkov. And thanks very much to you two for watching. We always welcome your thoughts. You can get in touch with us via our programme page on aljazeera.com. Also, do post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.